Hello and welcome to Developing Story. I'm Ashley McKinless, an associate editor here at America Media in New York. Yesterday, Pope Francis announced that he would gather the world's top bishops at the Vatican in February for a meeting on the prevention of sexual abuse. And today, Pope Francis met with 3 prominent U.S. bishops about the abuse crisis. Here's a short video on what we currently know.
Thank you so much for receiving us.
Today, top U.S. bishops met with Pope Francis to discuss the ongoing sexual abuse crisis in the Catholic Church. A statement from the U.S.C.C.B. after the meeting described it this way.
We are grateful to the Holy Father for receiving us an audience. We shared with Pope Francis our situation in the United States, how the body of Christ is lacerated by the evil of sexual abuse. He listened very deeply from his heart. It was a lengthy, fruitful, and a very good exchange.
The private encounter came a day after Pope Francis summoned the presidents of every bishops' conference in the world to a meeting at the Vatican on the theme of the protection of minors. The meeting, set to take place in February 2019, is believed to be the first of its kind and represents a recognition at the highest levels of the Church that sexual abuse of children by clergy is a global problem.
Joining me today from Chicago to discuss both meetings is America's national correspondent, Michael O'Loughlin. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, Ashley.
As we begin today's discussion, I want to take a moment to remind our viewers that you can send us your questions and comments about the story through Facebook or Twitter, and we will try to answer as many as possible here live. So, Michael, before we start talking about these 2 meetings, I'm wondering if you could flesh out what we mean when we say the sexual abuse crisis. Because it seems like there are a variety of crises going on in the Church in the U.S. and worldwide. So could you walk us through some of the stories that have prompted these meetings?
Sure, it's true. We talk about the sexual abuse crisis, like you said, but there are a variety of different crises going on that, in this round anyway, kind of traces their roots back to June, when the former Archbishop of Washington, Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, was removed from ministry by Pope Francis after an allegation of sexual abuse against a minor from about 45 years ago was found to be credible, substantiated. Following that, a couple more victims came forward who said that they were harassed or assaulted by the cardinal when they were priests and seminarians. The cardinals then resigned from the College of Cardinals. And this set off a sort of look into his past, how he was able to rise up to be one of the most powerful cardinals in the Church. And following that episode, we had the release of a grand jury report in Pennsylvania that detailed decades of abuse against 1,000 children by Catholic priests. Questions from that were raised about bishops who are still in charge today, how they handled those allegations, including Washington's current Archbishop, Cardinal Donald Wuerl. Cardinal Wuerl was already facing accusations that what did he know about McCarrick, and now there were these fresh accusations that he mishandled allegations when he was Bishop of Pittsburgh. Following that, as the Church was still grappling with those, you had this 11-page document that came out from the Pope's former ambassador to the United States, who charged that both Vatican officials in the United States, and Pope Francis himself knew of these abuse complaints against McCarrick and didn't take action. He called for the Pope to resign, and his allegations are still being investigated. So you had this summer where here in the U.S. there were these multifaceted problems with sexual abuse, combined with allegations around the world. We're still dealing with fallout from Ireland, Australia, Chile, Canada, Italy, India. And it's been this moment where Pope Francis is really trying to grapple with how to respond to these different accusations. Yeah.
So do we know exactly what led to the meeting this morning between, it was the head of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Was it all of them or one of them in specific that he wanted to discuss with the Pope?
Yeah, that's a good question, because a lot of these stories are being conflated. So specifically, this meeting this morning was Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, who's head of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. He said back in August that he wanted to meet with Pope Francis in order to discuss specifically the McCarrick investigation. He wanted to seek a lay-led investigation into who knew what and when about McCarrick, and how, like I said, he was able to rise up through the ranks to become this powerful cardinal. He requested this meeting sometime in the past few weeks. It was granted today. Joining him was Cardinal Sean O'Malley, the Archbishop of Boston, who leads the Vatican Sex Abuse Commission. And what what they talk about, we don't know, because the Vatican has stayed quiet on the issue. Cardinal DiNardo released a short statement afterwards saying the church here has been lacerated in terms of these abuse allegations, but we don't know the specifics. We don't know if the Pope approved an investigation or if the Cardinal even asked for one. We don't know if there'll be a new mechanism to report complaints against bishops, or if there'll be a look into how people can report these accusations more broadly.
Yeah. Before we talk about the meeting in February, there were other headlines today about the church in the U.S. With bishops resigning, one that has resigned and one that just said he might offer his resignation to the Pope.
Yeah, so right before the meeting happened, I believe, there was news that the Bishop of West Virginia, Bishop Michael Bransfield, has had his retirement accepted. So he turned 75 5 days ago, submitted his resignation like bishops are required to do, and the Pope accepted. But then sort of the shocking component to that story is he's facing an investigation of sexual harassment against adults. Archbishop William Laurie, who leads the church in Baltimore, will lead that investigation. He'll act as sort of the administrator of the West Virginia diocese while that goes on. And just to add a sort of surreal moment to that, the bishop facing the investigation, his cousin is the general secretary of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, and he was present at that meeting today. So we have that new investigation that was just announced today. And then Cardinal Donald Wuerl, the Archbishop of Washington, he announced in a blog post today that he would be traveling to Rome soon to meet with Pope Francis to urge him to accept his resignation that he submitted almost 3 years ago. So you have all these moving parts with these different aspects of the scandal, of the crisis that are somewhat difficult to keep track of, but it's important to keep up on the news because they are moving so quickly.
Yeah. So we have a question from Michael on Facebook who wants to know, at what point might these meetings involve lay people? So do you know if the meeting of bishops in February will involve lay people, or are there other plans to involve the laity?
Yeah, it's a great question we don't know the answer to. A number of cardinals and bishops here in the U.S. have said lay people have got to be part of any investigation. Not only part, some bishops have said they have to conduct the investigations themselves. The Vatican hasn't released any details about the February meeting, so we don't know if lay people will be there. We don't know if they'll bring in experts to brief the bishops. Church watchers suggest that that will be the case because without having a lay presence, the credibility of such a meeting will be called into question.
Yeah, and one thing, the meeting in February, going back to the point about this being multiple crises, is about the prevention of both minors and vulnerable adults, which I think a lot of people welcomed, because I think what's gotten lost in this, or there's often been conflation of the abuse of minors and people like seminarians in the case of McCarrick who are vulnerable to abuse. So what do you think new could come out of this this February meeting that did not already happen in 2002 when this crisis first broke into the news?
This is one of the big questions about this meeting. As you said, with McCarrick, the church seemed to enter a new phase of this abuse crisis where it wasn't abuse against children, but harassment and assault against adults. We've seen other adults come forward saying that seminaries, that they faced abuse and harassment there. There was a story on the Daily Beast by Paul Moses talking about abuse and harassment aimed at lay people working in parishes. This is sort of a new phase of this abuse crisis, at least in terms of the church responding. Whether this meeting will address it is unclear because the meeting seems aimed at minors and what they call vulnerable adults, and we haven't seen what that definition means yet. So again, I think it'll be, we'll have to just wait and see what the Vatican means when they say they'll be talking about these abuse allegations.
Yeah, and another question from social media about the meeting. We want to know, do we have a sense of why they're waiting until February to have this meeting? Pope Francis has come under some criticism for seeming to be slow to react to these stories coming out of the U.S., so why February?
Yeah, that's another excellent question that I don't think we have a good answer to yet. Next month, there'll be young people from around the world, young adults meeting in Rome for a synod that's been planned for years now. They will be discussing various issues facing the church. There were some calls to cancel that and to replace it with a meeting about sex abuse, but a number of lay participants and bishops said no, they should go ahead with that meeting. And then you get into questions of logistics. How do you pull together bishops from around the world to descend on Rome? That can be a difficult challenge. But there doesn't seem to be any indication from the Vatican as of yet about why they're waiting or why they chose these dates in February of 2019. And I think they'll continue to face some criticism that they're too slow to react.
Another thing that strikes me is the theme of the meeting is the prevention of abuse, but a lot of the conversation this summer has revolved around accountability for people who neglected to, get rid of priests who were abusive or who knew about the accusations against McCarrick. So is there any indication that accountability will be part of this meeting?
This has been a challenge for the bishops since the early days of this scandal back in 2002. Preventing abuse is one thing, and I think there's no opposition that this is a priority for the church. The church in the U.S. has made some progress on this issue, but it's been the accountability question that still evades church leaders. How will bishops who knew about abuse but did nothing, how will they be held accountable? We're seeing with Cardinal Wuerl now that he's stepping down, but will he be fired for this, or is he resigning on his own? The question of accountability is one that continues to plague the church. Cardinal DiNardo, the head of the Bishops' Conference, who met with the Pope today in Rome, he's facing fresh accusations that he was negligent in how he handled reported abuse. So even 15 years removed from the height of this scandal, there's still questions about our bishops being held accountable for not doing what they should have done.
Yeah. Have you seen any reactions in the U.S. From Catholics about this meeting? Are they welcoming it? Is it too little, too late?
Yeah, it's a good question. Part of one sad aspect of this scandal has been that sort of tensions in the church have been heightened by what's been accused by the Pope's former ambassador. What we're seeing with this is I think people are heartened that the Vatican seems to be listening to lay people who say there has to be more action, but it's unclear if action will follow this meeting. I think people are a little skeptical.
Yeah. In general, what has Pope Francis's track record on abuse been?
It's been mixed. He's been slow to respond to specific allegations. I think of the crisis in Chile, for example, where at first he seemed to not believe victims of abuse, suggested that they weren't telling the truth. He eventually came around, which led to the mass resignation of bishops from that country. Here in the United States, when he visited in 2015, the speeches he gave about sex abuse tended to be directed at priests and talking about the challenges they faced as the church has gone through this. So his record has been, I think, reluctance to tackle this head on. Never before now has the convergence of events come together so strongly that he has to tackle these. So I think he's at a major test in his papacy, and how he handles this could determine the legacy of reform that he's sought so hard for the last few years.
Yeah. Are the bishops going to be doing or discussing this at their meeting in November, or do they have any plans to tackle this issue before February?
Yeah, that's a good point. So U.S. bishops will meet for their annual gathering in November in Baltimore, and they will be discussing this. Cardinal DiNardo has said that part of his meeting with the Pope was to be able to come back to the bishops in November and tell them what was going on. The Bishops' Conference Executive Committee has been meeting regularly since the start of this crisis back in June. So in November, I think we'll see both an update from Cardinal DiNardo and other officers of the conference, and also I expect to see some calls from other bishops that the church has to be more transparent and bishops have to be held accountable.
Yeah. One thing I've seen a lot from people on Twitter is a call for, you mentioned the crisis in Chile where all of the bishops offered their resignations. Some people seem to want that from the U.S. bishops. What are the chances of that happening here?
I think the chances of that happening here are very low. We've seen some lay people calling for that sort of mass resignation. There was a petition, we wrote about this at americamagazine.org, where people said bishops should submit their resignations. But so far, even the bishops who are facing credible allegations that they've mismanaged abusive priests, we're seeing them dig in and say, no, we're staying where we are. It's our job to fix this. So I don't see anything like that happening here anytime soon.
Yeah. What concrete steps can you imagine coming out of the meeting in February?
Oh gosh, that is beyond my pay grade.
We have another question from Leo on Facebook that maybe is in your pay grade. The Pope has not really addressed the letter from Archbishop Vigano yet. Is there any indication that he is going to respond to the accusations that were made?
Sure. So this letter came out as the Pope was wrapping up his trip to Ireland in August, and he was asked about it by reporters, and he said at the time that he wouldn't, I'm paraphrasing, but he wouldn't basically dignify it with a response. He urged journalists to look into the accusations themselves and to come up with their own conclusions, but he did say he may address it at some point. Since that time, a number of stories have called into question some of Vigano's claims. It's verified other parts of the letter. We're told that the Vatican is preparing a response, that the Pope's Council of 9 Cardinal Advisors is drafting a response. So we think there could be something in the next couple of weeks that responds to some of the accusations, but there's nothing clear yet that Pope Francis himself will respond directly.
Okay. Well, we do know that this story will not be going away regardless. So thank you so much for joining us, Mike.
Thank you.
We'll keep following your coverage. And thank you, viewers, for joining us on Developing Story. For more videos like this, subscribe to America's YouTube channel. And you can find our complete coverage of the sex abuse crisis at americamag.org/abuse. Thanks for joining us.